Okay, so I was just pushing Ian on more technical details about potential middleware solutions. So the idea is, say, a social media site, instead of having their own bespoke algorithms, allows people to construct algorithms and offer them as products to users, and then people can choose, and that gets away with the centralized solution. But we need some way to specify a language in which these feed algorithms could get access to the actual data structures and whatever hardware algorithms are optimized available, so that they could efficiently compute feeds for people and even be charged for them. That is, if the feed algorithms getting access to some shared infrastructure of hardware and software, they need to charge for that. And so somebody would need to define a operating system like language in which you could write feed algorithms that reasonably mapped to the actual data structures and algorithms available and their costs. So the question is, how far has anybody gotten in trying to propose that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that's exactly what we're working on here, is getting, we have the basic protocols of the internet, which are about, a computer talking to another computer. And then you had web pages where you would publish a web page, and then that's where search engines started just looking at the content of the web page. The problem with social media is that we have, it's not really like even the protocols, it's just the policies that we've got, the whole kind of world has accepted of. You have a data silo like YouTube where everybody uploads their stuff to YouTube, and only YouTube knows that you've uploaded it to them, right? And all that stuff is there, and maybe you can try to crawl them, and they do things to try to stop you from crawling them. So in the early days of the internet, everybody wanted to get crawled by Google and the other web search engines so that they would get indexed. Now that we have vertically integrated silos, we have Google hoarding all that information for themselves, or Twitter hoarding all that information for themselves, and then only they can make recommendation algorithms now. So it's in terms of it's more of an issue of policy really than sure there's just like basic things you do. No engineer really has any respect for even like Vint Cerf or anything. Sorry, not Vint Cerf. Tim Berners-Lee. We do love Vint Cerf, but Tim Berners-Lee didn't really do anything that special with the HTTP protocols. But he set kind of like the policy standard that you can kind of see what's going on, and we can have crawlers and multiple entities can construct these databases.
For video, the metadata about the video is vastly smaller than the size of the video itself. So in that case, it makes sense to let lots of people create redundant databases and indices that describe the videos, and then all you need is permission to go see them. But for social media, the size of the data representing the social media tweets and posts, et cetera, are more comparable to the metadata. So it makes less sense to have lots of competing groups all collecting the same metadata about everything to redundantly have their own feeds based on their own collected data with their own supporting hardware, et cetera. I mean, wouldn't it make more sense to share a data structure and algorithm that represents them
I mean,
together?
sure it's just very easy to I guess that's not really the hard part. It is hard, and we're working on those sorts of things. But at the end of the day, if everybody is posting to Twitter and Twitter decides they do not want other people to have that database, that's the problem, right? Like Twitter has their own format, right?
So let's say we just require that everybody's allowed to scrape the Twitter database to make their own, indices of Twitter. That doesn't necessarily let them provide feeds about Twitter at the same cost that Twitter has, because Twitter obviously has, data structures and algorithms that integrate this large set of tweets into an efficient way that they can produce feeds. Is it in fact, don't we care about that cost advantage?
I think the cost is kind of negligible now for something like Twitter, where it's just posts. Like, it's a very small amount of data actually in Twitter when you're talking about the text of the posts. So that's a negligible cost in terms of the other things that they do. So
then you would just suggest the way to free it up is just allow people to scrape and create their own databases with their own hardware and their own infrastructure to provide their own feeds.
Yeah, that's part of it. I mean, the kind of when we're focusing on things like Twitter, we're focused on our protocols. We're focusing on things like, well, who verifies that you actually made this post? Well, it's Twitter, right? They do all this stuff to verify your account when you type in a password and everything. And if you forget your password, you might be able to call them and recover your password, et cetera. So they are verifying your identity. So that is one of the more complicated things that we're trying to do. But even that's basic cryptography that was kind of figured out in the 1970s in terms of having a public and private key to identify yourself.
So then in your mind, it's just enough to so if we have this middleware, it's just enough to let the middleware get access to some API where they can just query for database elements. And it doesn't have to be especially efficient
it doesn't.
interface.
Right.
It'll still allow effectively competing feeds well enough.
Yes, exactly. It would be very cheap. I mean, this is stuff that was being done very well. It wasn't even that expensive to do this in the late 90s, and it's even cheaper to do it now for things like text. When you get into video, it does get harder. If you want to
import the video itself, if you just want to get the metadata about which videos are where, then that would still stay cheap, right?
Exactly. That would stay cheap.
And even the comments about the video will still be pretty cheap, right?
Right. I mean, and you see this. I mean, we have a very robust ecosystem of content you can get via BitTorrent, the BitTorrent protocol right now, which is hard. It's a lot of traffic on the internet, but it's something that people are paying for, right? So, and it's working.
Okay.
Right.
So then, in your mind, the main limitation that prevents competing feeds is, in fact, the fact that these sites don't let feed generators do database queries to see what's where.
Exactly. Basically, they're sitting on data. So why does Google make money? Because they can sell ads, they can manipulate their consumers and doing things based on all this data they have, right?
Right. But you might say the feed. Look, these alternative feeds don't have to have alternative ads, right? The feed could just point you to things on the main site, which would have the ads there. So they wouldn't necessarily lose the ads by having an alternative feed.
Well, that's a competitive. Their advantage at Google is knowing more about you than other people do.
Right. So if you see their feed, they might get more overall ad revenue if it becomes a better matching of the feed to the people who are willing to pay ads, right? But still, if somebody makes a separate feed, but each entry in the feed is a link to the main site's data, then the ads will be there and you'll still see the ads.
Sure, but I mean, part of it is the feed, right? So Google's making money even on the feed itself. When you search for something, they can. I mean, maybe not so much in YouTube search results, but obviously we see this in web search results, right? When they give you that list of things, you can see that's where they make their money, right? They insert something in there that they think there's a high likelihood that you'll do something, you'll make a purchase or something.
So then you're saying if you have an alternative feed and it gets a list of things, then the key thing is it won't be sticking ads in the list.
Right. Well.
Or it won't be sticking the same ads that
it'll be sticking different ads, or maybe
ads.
Maybe it's a subscription thing. We're seeing people now. A lot of people are excited about AI, the large language model search results, just because there's no ads anymore, and for now they're paying money. You're paying ChatGPT money, and to get hopefully good results. I see the large language modules as just like glorified search engines of myself, but
right. Well, so now, I mean, if we're going to give the alternative feed generators their ad revenue from seeing it in the feed, then we do somehow need to have them pay the main site for the infrastructure they provided. So we need some sort of cost model to ask what should be the payment there. And that seems like a hard thing to figure out. So somebody should work that out.
Well, it's the cost model of the internet is you're paying. It is just kind of like you just pay to get connected, right? And your neighbor can be using your internet.
Right, but we're not in the internet model. We're in the social media model now, right? So the question is...
Well, anybody can be a server, right? So, when you're looking at things like the BitTorrent protocol, where I could run a BitTorrent node on the same internet you're on, and I'm costing my ISP 1,000 times more than you're getting charged. In terms of so it's hard to like that. That's maybe one of the things that is it's hard to properly with the way the internet is designed. It's hard to kind of do those sorts of charges, right? So I do think Google has figured out how to lower costs quite a bit for all the hosting they do. Right?
Absolutely. So, and we want to let them get credit for that and get paid for that, right? Rather than force everybody to reproduce all these things with separate redundant databases.
Sure. But then you might argue at some point that Google's a natural monopoly, right? So I don't know.
Right. So, but I think, look, there's two very different solutions here. We can try to make a decentralized thing like the internet was or BitTorrent is that provides the main functions of social media, or we can let the social media people still have their social media sites, but then do some sort of a, requirement where they have to let certain kinds of data be visible to somebody. Those seem like very different solutions. And so I was thinking about that second sort of solution when I was thinking, has somebody proposed a protocol and the costing for it? Clearly, if you're just going to replace them entirely with something else, that's a whole different solution. But
there's lots of protocols that are trying to do this. We're one of the companies doing these sorts of things. There's there's things like Mastodon that are trying to do these things. Like I've mentioned BitTorrent. There's the Nostr protocol.
So but BitTorrent isn't a replacement for say Twitter, right?
No.
Or Facebook or.
I mean, people would say RSS, maybe even if you want to go back to a really old protocol, RSS is something kind of like Twitter.
Kind of like, right. Yeah. But people very much prefer Twitter over RSS. So clearly they've added a lot of value by what they've created there. And we want people to be able to add that value in the future.
The way I look at this is, you're right, there's two ways you can look at this. There's the kind of regulation way, and there's the build it better way. My opinion is that it's not that expensive to build this. Like, you've got these companies that are worth tens of billions of dollars, and it's not that expensive to try to do this in a better way. But
what's expensive is all the value that the customers have gotten from their current thing, which makes them reluctant to switch, right? There's this huge network effect. You can make an alternative system, but if nobody uses it, it doesn't help. And to try to get people to switch, you have to convince them there's going to be value if they switch, and they fear the risk they're going to lose this value they're getting from where they are. And that's the hard part.
Absolutely. Like we're not building the software is the easy part in some ways, right? Getting people to switch, that's the harder part, and it's a monumental task, right? What we're trying to do here is we're at the very least going to say, hey, look, this stuff doesn't have to be the way that you say it has to be, Google. This isn't the way you say it has to be, Twitter. You can actually build these things properly, and you chose not to. So that's one of the things we can accomplish just by having a nice product.
Right, but who is that message sent to? Who is the audience for that message?
It could be Elon Musk, right? Elon Musk cares more about people care about more than just maximizing shareholder value, right? Like we have Elon Musk losing quite a bit of money on Twitter, but he thinks it's more important for the future of humanity that we keep free speech alive, right? So if you're trying to maximize the shareholder value according to current rules.
But if the plan here is we're going to make a demo and then somebody's going to be willing to lose billions of dollars to implement our demo on a larger scale, that seems a pretty risky plan.
Well, I mean, I'm an engineer. I'm trying to build the best thing I can, right? Like I found myself in a position where I could not build software that I was proud of with the current rule set given by the kind of the government of the United States. So if I cannot build software that I'm proud of at any company, I'm going to create some sort of company where I can build software that I'm proud of. And yeah, maybe we lose all of our money. Like that's fine. We're at least building stuff that we can be proud of.
Okay, but at the highest level, there's these two approaches. One is to just create new centers and get some people to switch somehow, and the other is somehow to convince the existing centers to change what they do, or maybe regulate them to force them to change what they do. Those are the main categories of solutions we got.
Right. And we care about the kind of the regulation, but it's also not our, it's not my role kind of when I look at like, what is my purpose in life? What is my personal purpose in life? Is to write software. I'm a software engineer, and kind of the way that the like as I said, the way that the rules of the game are set up, I don't like the rules of the game. So I'm just going to build software that maybe, according to the current rules of the game, is not profitable, right? But it's still something that we can be proud of. And a lot of the thought that went into the internet in the beginning was this kind of thinking. It wasn't necessarily let's build, back in the late 90s, mid 90s, right? We had AOL, which was very much we're just going to be a big company, right? And we had the internet, which was more of a defense department and academic, thing. And it actually did succeed over, right? Like AOL did wind up having to adopt the internet because their proprietary vertically integrated system was not the best value for consumers at that time.
An idea just occurred to me. As you know, part of what's driven the internet is this legal interpretation that they aren't responsible for what people say on there as if they were publishers, that they're more like a telephone company. What if we said they are responsible for what they curate in the feeds they give, but they aren't responsible if third-party feeds?
Yeah, absolutely. Like that's one of the rules that's actually made it.
Wouldn't that push them
powerful.
to like support third-party feeds if they were responsible for what they put in their feed, but not responsible for,
right.
Basically, look, if individuals chose their feed, then, no longer responsible, and they were willing to sign off their rights to saying, oh, yeah, I agree that this might be offensive or whatever, but I've decided to pick this. And now they're not responsible.
Right.
Then I would think the centers would say, yeah, we don't want to run the feeds. We want a competing, ecology of feeds here.
Exactly. So like one simple rule change would change everything, right? All of a sudden, everybody's looking for. I don't want to do moderation. I want my church doing moderation, right? Whoever is better at doing moderation can start doing moderation now, and they would build the tools to allow that to happen very quickly.
And as you know, like there's industries where the suppliers tend to be small because they're afraid of large lawsuits, like people who make small airplanes, things like that, right? So
right,
you could think,
exactly.
well, if you're afraid of a very big lawsuit, then just be a small firm, and you could just have a lot of very small, feed providers.
Exactly.
Because they were afraid of the lawsuit. So just a legal structure change like that could cause the change.
Right. If I were if I were good at passing laws, I would be doing these exact sort of things. I'd be living in Washington D.C. trying to advocate for these things. But like I said, I'm an engineer. FUTO exists for engineers who just like we want to like engineers. Like there's a pride in just creating nice software, regardless of.
I'm just an economist, but I'm not committed to any of these things, so I can just make whatever suggestion makes sense to me, regardless of who I am.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely interesting. I maybe Ian already got this. I was like, is there any way you can calculate the cost to society of kind of like the censorship that occurs?
That sounds hard.
Yeah.
I wouldn't know how to do it creditably. Look at most of history, most people lived in pretty restricted, censored worlds. It's only lately that we've had examples of relatively wide open worlds. So you can get some maybe value of people choosing to move from one place to another, what they're getting from this.
Yeah, I mean, you just have to think of, what piece of us, every time Google connects you to a piece of content, right, they're creating wealth, right? But if they're eliminating some of the connections that might occur because of other reasons, that's destroying wealth, right? That is costing us.
Look, but our solution here is sort of our standard solution to everything without much modification, which is just let firms, for-profit firms, handle whatever they want to handle and let whatever customers want to come to them and let it be. You're like that. And that's what's happening here is the usual solution for most everything, right? So it'll take work to get people to coordinate on anything other than the usual solution.
Yeah.
So that's why I fear that it'll stay like this for a while.
That's fair. That's fair.
But I'm interested in having this conversation to think about what alternatives are possible.
Has anybody ever done is anybody looking at intellectual property law in the sense of the restrictions that intellectual property law puts on activity costing destroying wealth? In the sense that I can't, if I could create the most awesome Star Trek episode with my home studio, but I can't because it's still under copyright. Isn't that destroying wealth there?
Well, there's a large literature, of course, on how intellectual property has advantages and disadvantages with respect to its incentives. So people know many disadvantages and well aware of them, but the question is, could you come up with something better? There's this idea of a self-set property tax, which might make intellectual property easier to transfer. So if your worry is these companies are holding on some property and they just won't let go, and that's why we can't do better things, then there is a way to make that easier to get them to sell their intellectual property.
Yeah, I'm speaking mostly as as an ex Star Wars fan who wishes that the fans could create Star Wars the way it should be created.
Well, I mean, the question is why they don't sell that for cheap, because you would think that would add to the value of their property. You would think fan fiction generally adds to the aura and popularity of things, so they should want to support fan fiction to some degree. And then I guess they're just afraid of people stealing their stuff and the fan fiction displacing their main fiction. But
yeah, I think that's part of it. Yeah, I mean they've done some mean things to people who have created some nice Star Wars content over the last several years.
Right. Although, I mean, we have to admit that maybe ordinary fans would be put off by some fan fiction associations if it were authorized and official. So they, look, anybody who has a very old franchise with a lot of fans who have been fans for a long time knows that the fans could be pretty picky about messing with the franchise, and
right.
They're probably going to play it safe,
right,
with beloved, long-established things.
All right. Well, thank you, Robin.
And nice talking to you. So
this was really nice talking to you.
I haven't got a chance to think these issues through in a while, so this was fun to revisit and think about it a bit more.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Take care.